Good morning, everyone. Can you hear me? I hope that everybody's doing well. I know it's good morning or good evening or good afternoon in other parts of the world. I see a lot of participants, a lot of geologists, batchmates, and friends from around the world joining us today. No? So thank you. Maraming salamat for being with us today. I am Alisa Peleo Alampay. I'm the co-host of this particular session on physical and geological sciences of the PAASE annual meeting, also called APAMS 2020. And I'm joined today by Dr. Gisela Concepcion, the PAASE president, who was very convincing in trying to put up this session with me. No? So may I now probably introduce the speakers very fast. So today we have Dr. Solidum, Renato Solidum from PHIVOLCS and DOST. We also have Dr. Mario Aurelio of NIGS. The rest of the speakers are from NIGS, our home ground. Dr. Bechaida Payot, also from NIGS, Dr. Alan Fernando, and myself. So it's 5 speakers. The first speaker will be for about 30 minutes, and the rest of us will try to keep our talks within 15 minutes. We'll have the Q&A after Dr. Solidum's talk, and then another Q&A after Dr. Aurelio and Dr. Payot's talk, and the last Q&A will be after Dr. Fernando's and my talk at the end. Before we start, maybe a little bit of the house rules. For this meeting, the chat box is enabled, so you can put your questions in the chat box, and we'll try to have the speaker answer it as we go along. And then please put your, if it's enabled, please put your mics on mute and your videos stop the video for your Zoom meetings so that people can concentrate on the speaker while the talk is going on. And then later on, hopefully, we can turn on the video and have a group picture at the end of the session. No? So I see a lot of chats from friends. No? It's really heartwarming to see you here in the session today. So before I start chatting too much, may I call on the president of PAASE, Dr. Gisela Concepcion, former vice president for academic affairs of the University of the Philippine System. And I think this is probably the time to congratulate her also. She's going to be conferred a special honor very soon by the university, and I think we're going to see a lot more of her in the university in the years to come. So before anything else, here's Dr. Gisela Concepcion, PAASE President. Please take it away, Ma'am Giselle.
Oh, wow. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for joining us today. Thank you, Alisa, for that very, very special segue to this important talk by a person who's difficult at this time to have as our guest speaker because he is a disaster czar. And he just told us that he's extremely busy during this time of COVID-19. So on behalf of everyone in the audience, we would like to thank you for accepting our invitation. Dr. Renato U. Solidum Jr., Undersecretary of the Department of Science and Technology and officer in charge of the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology. Dr. Renato Solidum Jr. is a geologist. He obtained a BS Geology degree from the University of the Philippines. He finished his Master of Science in Geological Sciences from the University of Illinois at Chicago and his PhD in Earth Sciences from the Scripps Institution of Oceanography, University of California, San Diego. He has worked with the Philippine Institute of Volcanology and Seismology, or PHIVOLCS, since 1984 and became its director in 2003 up to February 2017. He was appointed Undersecretary of the Department of Science and Technology, DOST, for Disaster Risk Reduction and Climate Change, DRRCC, and assigned as officer in charge of PHIVOLCS since March 2017. He was appointed Undersecretary for Scientific and Technical Services of DOST in October 2019. He has been designated as the Commissioner for UNESCO National Commission of the Philippines, Department of Foreign Affairs from 2017 to 2020. He also serves as member of the Global Assessment Report, GAR, Advisory Board of the United Nations Office for Disaster Risk Reduction from 2020 to 2022. In recognition of his contributions to disaster risk reduction in the Philippines, Dr. Solidum has been awarded the Presidential Citation for Public Service, the Presidential Lingkod Bayan Civil Servant Award by the Civil Service Commission, the Professional of the Year in the Yield of Geology by the Professional Regulation Commission, the Excellence Award for Government Service by the Philippine Federation of Professional Associations, and the Presidential Career Executive Service Award by the Career Executive Service Board. So, ladies and gentlemen, you can imagine how important our special guest is today during this time of our pandemic. So I would now like to give the floor to our guest speaker and welcome him to give his talk. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Concepcion, for the introduction. And hi to my fellow geologists, and good morning to all the guests. We have been affected by COVID-19. We live in an abnormal time. We saw how many urban areas have been affected by this pandemic. We saw disruptions in governance, in businesses, which have really impacted the economic development. The social lives of people have been disrupted, but we became closer with their family because of the quarantine. But COVID-19 can actually give us a better idea of the potential impact of large-scale disasters like geological events, strong earthquake events, or tsunamis. This pandemic has also shown us the need for increased resilience of urban areas in the Philippines, especially Greater Metro Manila area, which is the seat of governance, business, education, and would host almost all the national agencies of government. The Philippines is ranked within the top 10 of the countries most exposed to hazard. It's ranked number 8, and Japan is ranked number 9. We are also ranked among the countries most at risk within the top 10, and Japan is now out of the list. Why is this so? Because Japan is considered a resilient country. It can be less affected by the hazards, or if affected, they can easily recover and go back to the state that they were in before as soon as possible. This is what we want. The high exposure of a country to various hazards are all understandable. We are prone to many hydro-meteorological hazards because we're part of the typhoon belt, and many other weather systems would bring in heavy rains that would cause floods and landslides. Obviously, we're part of the Pacific Ring of Fire, and we have many geological events like strong earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and tsunami. The continued warming of the globe would exacerbate the various hydrometeorological hazards and can actually influence the impact of geological hazards because of the wetter environment. We need to prepare for all these hazards, some of which are sudden onset events like earthquake events, and some are very slow like climate change. However, in the light of the occurrence of the COVID-19 pandemic, we have to make sure that we also add other emergencies like health emergencies, making sure that we are safe not only for these various natural hazards, but also for future pandemics or epidemics. Recent hydro-meteorological disasters are fairly known to almost all of you. We had the tropical storm Kitsana or Ondoy event, which devastated Metro Manila and surrounding provinces, and more than 1,000 people died. Of course, in 2013, Super Typhoon Yolanda affected Tacloban City and nearby towns. In terms of volcanic eruptions, we have the two most active volcanoes, Mayon volcano and Taal. And in January this year, we saw the devastation that Taal caused in the towns of Batangas and even the surrounding provinces. Nobody really got, the casualty was very low, but the impact in terms of disruption was kind of significant. We have seen also the effect of the large-scale eruption of Pinatubo and the devastating lahars that caused the destruction of even towns far away from the crater of the volcano. Many cities were affected by eruptions of Mayon, of Pinatubo, and even Taal. In terms of large earthquake events, some of us can remember the 1968 Casiguran earthquake. It caused destruction in Manila, especially the Ruby Tower. But the most damaging geologic event so far in terms of casualty was the magnitude 8.1 Moro Gulf earthquake and tsunami that killed more than 8,000 people. In 1990, a magnitude 7.8 earthquake caused the death of around 1,300 people and disrupted the economic development of the country and Luzon Island. In recent years, we had earthquakes in Bohol of magnitude 7.2, where more than 200 people died. Earthquakes in Surigao City that killed less than 10 people, and the series of strong earthquakes in Cotabato, which I think Dr. Aurelio will present later on. If we review all of these various disasters, we can enumerate many impacts. Common of which would be the following: life loss or injury, and we don't want that. Diseases. This is especially shown during this pandemic. The physical effect would be damage to buildings, infrastructures, properties, and assets. We can see loss or interruption of public and other critical services, loss or interruption of food supply, loss or interruption of lifelines like water, energy, electricity, communications, and even transport systems can be affected. We can see loss of business, livelihood, or revenues from business interruption. If the scale of impact is quite large, we see disruption of our economic development. If houses are destroyed, or if areas are considered to be hazardous, people get displaced. In disasters, social lives of people and the communities are disrupted. Sometimes we see damage to the environment. Those impacts that are underlined are the impacts that I think were caused by COVID. Because of COVID-19 and the need for quarantine, we had operations of businesses and government to around only 30% during the enhanced quarantine. Many small, medium enterprises had stopped operating, around 50%, and many had partial operations only. And because of this, people's livelihood were severely affected. Transport systems like public buses and trains were also stopped, even the aviation sector. This had caused economic impact, which is projected to around more than 2 trillion pesos. There is a big difference, though, between COVID-19 and impacts of natural hazards like large earthquake events. The COVID-19 effect did not cause physical destruction of our facilities and buildings. But if there is a large earthquake event in urban areas, then we will see the disruption to be greater. What we want to do is increase the resilience of all our communities, our businesses, and our organization. Disaster resilience is actually a state where we don't get affected severely if the hazards would occur, and we are able to respond properly and quickly so that we can recover in time because the impact will not be large. If we want to achieve a state of disaster resilience, we have to make sure that we reduce the potential losses before the hazards would occur, ensure that we have an effective and efficient disaster response. We need to prepare, and we need to make sure that our preparedness actions are implemented so that our responses are timely and effective so that people's lives are saved. If we are able to reduce the risk and ensure an effective response, then the scale of impact will not be quite large. So we will be able to efficiently and quickly recover and move forward. By learning lessons from past disasters, we can actually increase the state of resilience of our communities and our country. In particular, if we talk about resilience and the challenges that we face, there is a disparity in the vulnerability of various places. In reality, there is more vulnerability in urban areas because of the concentration of people and organizations in a small area, just like Metro Manila, the concentration of capital investments in urban areas. We have businesses here because people come here with a desire of getting a livelihood. We have high incidence of poverty because of the uncontrolled influx of people in the metropolis. Because of the number of people wanted to stay here, hazardous land areas are being utilized for settlement. Because of the enormity of things that are being handled, we see lacks in enforcement of building and construction regulations, especially for those at the lower income level, and also lacks in enforcement of land use plans. In many big cities, there is institutional capacity limitations from both government and the private sector. So if we situate ourselves here in Metro Manila and compare Metro Manila with the rest of the cities in the Philippines, there is a very high exposure to hazards, to the epidemics in Greater Metro Manila area. Why is it so? Well, in Metro Manila alone, the political Metro Manila, we have 12.8 million people. If we include the provinces of Bulacan, Rizal, Cavite, and Laguna, we have close to 26 million people. We have more than 1.3 million residential buildings and thousands of medium to high rises in Metro Manila. We host very vital international and domestic airports and international and domestic ports, which would actually be the landing area of supplies to various parts of the zone. Metro Manila also is the center of government. We have the legislative, executive, and judiciary, and almost all national agencies here. This is also the center of business, commerce, and finance, and of course, the educational system. Greater Metro Manila area, if we combine the National Capital Region, Regions 4A, and Region 3, comprises the largest share of the country's economic output, around 63%. We are also the host of the uniformed personnel of government, both the police and armed forces of the Philippines headquarters are in Metro Manila. So ladies and gentlemen, we have placed almost all our eggs in one basket, that a large-scale earthquake can really severely affect directly the greater Metro Manila area and indirectly the whole Philippines. And we have seen this in this COVID-19 pandemic in terms of government operations, business operations, people being stranded, transport sectors affected, and our health system being put to the test. Would this scenario really happen? If you look at historical earthquakes in Metro Manila, just visit historical churches like Manila Cathedral, and the signage in front of these historical churches would tell us that Metro Manila has been affected by large earthquake events in the past. For example, the old Manila Cathedral was partially destroyed by an earthquake in 1600, an earthquake in 1645, which originated from the Philippine Fault Zone in Central Luzon, and by an offshore earthquake in 1863. Last August 2, 1968, an earthquake from the Casiguran Fault caused the destruction of Ruby Tower in Binondo, Manila, which killed 268 people and injured 260. All of these earthquake events originated outside of Manila. How much more would the impact be if the earthquake will originate in Metro Manila? This scenario is possible because there are many earthquake generators surrounding Metro Manila, and one is actually transecting the eastern side of Metro Manila and affecting other provinces nearby. We have the Valley Fault system, which has two components, the West Valley Fault and the East Valley Fault. And the West Valley Fault is considered a candidate site for a magnitude 7.2 earthquake, which can cause very strong shaking in greater Metro Manila area and impact severely the areas near the fault. Another earthquake that must be considered in terms of preparedness would be a magnitude 8 to 8.5 earthquake from the Manila Trench, which can cause also severe shaking in Metro Manila, but not as strong as the Valley Fault system, but can cause a tsunami all over Western Luzon and even Manila Bay. For those non-geologists in the audience, let me just introduce to you that whenever we prepare for an earthquake event, there are various hazards that we need to consider. The first is surface faulting. Most people are so afraid of the fault because they think that the ground would open up and gobble up anything. Hindi po mangyayari yon. But Filipinos by nature are very interested to know where the faults are because we are fault finder. We are a fault finder country, literally, geologically speaking. But if we don't put up structures directly on top of it, the real hazard that we all need to prepare for would be the ground shaking. It can cause collapses of houses and buildings and infrastructure. And during the strong ground shaking, soft ground can liquefy. Steep slopes can be affected by landslides. During and after a ground shaking, there can be fire because of electrical short circuit or gas tanks or pipes that might ignite fire. If, on the other hand, the earthquake is offshore, then ground shaking, liquefaction, landslide, and fire can also happen, but an additional hazard called tsunami can affect the coastal areas. So if we want to prepare for a strong earthquake, we need to consider all of this. If you look at the West Valley Fault, its location and where the significant transport systems are, we see that the West Valley Fault transects major roads like C5, Ortigas, Marcos Highway, SLEX, and a rail line. It's also very near the interchanges in SLEX like Alabang and Susana. In terms of building and considering buffer zone, at least 5 meters on both sides of the fault trace, around 3,000 buildings are exposed to the possible surface faulting when the fault would move. Therefore, we need to consider the possible impact to transport systems into Manila and out of Manila in case of a strong earthquake. In terms of ground shaking, if there's a magnitude 7.2 earthquake, there will be at least intensity 8 shaking in Greater Metro Manila area, Bulacan, Western Rizal, parts of Cavite, Laguna, and Batangas, and Southern Pampanga, and these are shown on the map on the left side as yellow colors. Based on the Metro Manila Earthquake Impact Reduction Study that JICA, PHIVOLCS, and MDA conducted, we think that around 38% of the residential buildings, 38% of 10 to 30-story buildings, 30 to 35% of public buildings, and 14% of more than 30-story buildings will be affected by the shaking with categories of slight to heavy damage. In Metro Manila only, around 33,500 people may die, and an additional death would occur from fires that might occur. In 2013, we asked ourselves, what if the earthquake will not be magnitude 7.2? What if it will be lower? What will be the impact in Metro Manila? This was done through a risk analysis project by PHIVOLCS and Geoscience Australia. And shown on the screen would be the maps of ground shaking with the yellow as intensity 8, 7 is the green, for both a magnitude 7.2 and 6.5 earthquake scenario. And you would see that around 31,000 people may die in a magnitude 7.2 earthquake, and injuries would be close to 500,000. For a magnitude 6.5 earthquake, then we will see around 23,000 deaths, still a lot of injured, more than close to 400,000. In terms of building losses, direct replacement cost, for a magnitude 7.2 earthquake, it will be 2.3 trillion pesos and a 6.5, 1.8 trillion pesos. This does not include the cost of impact to businesses and economic disruption, which will be far more greater than what COVID can do in Metro Manila. But the earthquake does not, or the shaking does not stop within the political boundary of Metro Manila. It will also affect the other provinces. So in total, we estimate around 50,000 fatality and 24,000 very seriously injured. We need to make sure that we lower the impact of earthquakes in terms of loss of lives, but we'll only be able to do this if we do actions on reducing the risk, both using engineering and non-engineering solutions. In terms of liquefaction, shown on the map would be the areas exposed to liquefaction. Around 1/3 of Metro Manila will be affected, and around 600,000 buildings can be affected by liquefaction. People can be displaced because of liquefaction. In terms of lifelines, we expect damages and interruption in water supply, power, telecommunications, bridges and roads can be affected, and even our international port and airport, because of liquefaction and strong ground shaking, can be affected. Because of these various effects, we will see the possible isolation immediately after an earthquake of Greater Metro Manila area into various quadrants, at least 4, based on the location of the major river systems like Marikina and Pasig, and also the impact because of ground shaking, liquefaction, and fire. And these isolated areas have been used to be the basis of designating which local government and which unit of the armed forces of the country will be assigned to respond to these various zones in case there's a large earthquake. If, on the other hand, the earthquake will be offshore from the Manila Trench, we expect an intensity 8 to 7 shaking in Metro Manila, less severe as the shaking brought about by the West Valley Fault movement, but we have to worry about a possible tsunami, which will arrive in the Manila Bay area for slightly more than an hour, and we project to have around close to 6 meters of tsunami, if in case that would happen. And shown on the middle of the screen would be the areas to be affected by the tsunami. Tsunami would expose around 2.4 million population and around 300,000 buildings. So given this potential impact, how do we prepare for large events in the metropolis, especially in Metro Manila? The President and his cabinet approved in 2017 an earthquake resiliency measure to make Greater Metro Manila area earthquake resilient. And we have subdivided this into two major groups: reducing the risk in Greater Metro Manila area and enhancing the resilience of Greater Metro Manila area and the rest of the country, because other big cities have their own faults and they have their own potential large earthquake scenario, like Cebu, Davao, Iloilo, and other cities. Let me discuss some of these in more detail. In terms of reducing the risk in Greater Metro Manila area, we need to reduce Metro Manila's population density through dispersion of economic and business activities. Maybe not only dispersion of economic and business activities, but also dispersion of national government offices. We need to establish an integrated, we are establishing already, a regional government center in a more resilient site, maybe in central zone, so that in case there's a large earthquake, the national government can govern in this integrated regional government center. We need to formulate service or business continuity plans, including setting up of backup national government and business offices outside of Metro Manila. This is clearly shown by the current pandemic, where government operations and business operations were reduced to at most 30% during the enhanced quarantine period. To make sure that buildings do not collapse, we have to enforce resilient building standards. We need to have a new building act to include the recent technologies and making sure that the procedures and implementation towards efficient and resilient buildings will be flexible enough to accommodate new technologies. In terms of enhancing the resilience of Greater Metro Manila area and the rest of the country, we need to ensure the resilience of critical infrastructure and government buildings. We need to have redundant roads. We have to increase expressways, both towards the north and south. We have to have a strong port, at least one pier in the south or north harbor that is earthquake resistant. And we have to make sure that we have redundant and multiple airports, not only here in Metro Manila, but even outside and less affected by the earthquake. We need to make sure that the logistic supply using ports will be redistributed so that it's not only the port of Manila that is utilized, we need to utilize port of Batangas and Subic. We need to ensure continuous land, air, and sea access after a disaster. We also have to make sure that lifelines are immediately available so that we have water supply, food supply. We have to make sure that hospitals and schools and housing and buildings are secured. If government will be affected by a strong earthquake, we need to establish redundant government command and control centers outside of Metro Manila, in Luzon, in Visayas, and Mindanao. I have mentioned that we have identified which local government and armed forces units are supposed to respond to the different parts of the Greater Metro Manila area in case there's a large earthquake event. But these LGUs are not all ready. Some are ready, some are not. So we have to capacitate assisting first responders. To focus on various efforts by government and also to include the efforts both of the private organizations and international partners, the government has established a full-time project management office through an executive order so that these efforts are coordinated well. Ladies and gentlemen, COVID-19 has shown us that large, extreme events can happen. Our country is exposed to extreme natural events like earthquakes, climate change, tropical cyclones, tsunamis, many others, and epidemics that can cause loss of lives, properties, and disrupt economic and social functions. In 2018, the World Health Organization, through a joint evaluation of experts, have seen that the Philippines is not ready for an epidemic, September 2018, and it suddenly occurred with the COVID-19. We saw the need to establish more testing centers. We need to have more hospitals ready to accommodate patients. But in case of large earthquake events, these places must also be structurally resistant so that we have these facilities to respond to the potential victims. Urban areas are highly vulnerable to large-scale disasters due to the concentration of population, buildings, businesses in a small area. And with this large number of population and things to handle, we see institutional capacity limitations. COVID-19 has shown to us the possible impact of a large-scale disaster to urban areas globally and in the Philippines. Therefore, we need to increase the resilience of our cities like Greater Metro Manila area, not only to pandemic, but also to other hazards like earthquake events. We already have seen the impact. It's not very difficult to imagine the physical impact and many other consequences that these events, natural events, can cause. The effect of COVID-19 in Greater Metro Manila area may be surpassed because of the physical damage and social and economic disruption should a large-scale natural event, such as a major earthquake, would occur in the area. We need to work together to make our communities, our cities, and our country a safer place to live in. We cannot go anywhere. This is our place. We need to be resilient. Maraming pong salamat sa inyong lahat.
Maraming pong salamat, Yusek Solidum. Very informative and very important for all of us, academics, practitioners, citizens, to be guided by you regarding disasters such as earthquakes and now this pandemic. So I would like to invite the audience to type your questions in the chat box. And I have several questions, but I would like to read the first one from Luis Masigla. Dr. Solidum, can you compare and contrast the amount of science that was used to mitigate the effects of the most recent Taal eruption versus mitigating the effects of the current pandemic? It's a very good question, I think.
Well, thank you, Luis. Luis, by the way, is a former colleague here at PHIVOLCS. He's now outside of the Philippines. Thank you for the question. It's a tough question, but let me just say that for Taal volcano, we have been studying it. We know what it can do. So we have done a lot of work for the past many decades and really have invested in putting up sensors in this volcano. So whenever we prepare for an event, whether it's a natural event or epidemic, first we have to know the hazards associated with it and the potential impact. So we know that in Taal volcano, a large eruption like 1754 would actually cause a significant number of population to be evacuated, around 200,000. We also need to we also know that operations around it will be disrupted. The second thing is we have to know when this scenario would likely to happen. So you need to increase the monitoring of the volcano. The only problem with Taal is that sometimes it will show signs but not erupt. And there was a possibility that a phreatic eruption would just trigger a large-scale eruption. And that's what happened in January. The third is to be able to inform the potential communities to be affected in advance. So we did a lot of work with them. And in fact, in 2019, there have been many barangays that were doing their own drill. And that what was good was the provincial government already had a plan in case of a worst case scenario that was coordinated with us because of the hazards and impact analysis. And of course, the last thing is making sure that people know how to respond effectively and timely, and this must be in coordination with the local government and other national agencies. So there was a lot of pre-event preparation and scientific studies already. In terms of the COVID-19, I think we have to admit that this was very fast. But I already mentioned to you earlier on that in 2018, I discovered that when I was doing research about this COVID-19 and preparedness of countries in terms of epidemics, that indeed the Philippines was good in certain aspects, but we needed to do many things on facilities, on testing, even on zoonotic studies, the study of diseases from animals and transferring to people, even the tracing, all of these were there in the report. So I think there's a big difference, but this situation is slightly different because the Taal eruption was a localized event, but the COVID-19 is a global problem. It started from outside of the country.
Thank you, Dr. Solidum. So I have two quick questions. May I ask whether those who were affected by the Taal eruption are also affected by COVID-19? Is there something unusual about their situation because they lost their homes, their livelihood? So how is the incidence of COVID-19 in that area?
As far as I know, it's not that, well, it's not so significant in terms of COVID-19. The people who got displaced were, one, those living in the volcano island, which is a permanent danger zone, and houses that got destroyed because the fissures that ruptured the surface, ruptured the houses on top of it. But I think since the province had a very good experience on handling Taal volcano, they were also very strict in terms of people's interaction because of their experience in Taal when it came to COVID-19. They're one of the very strict LGUs in terms of mobility.
Now, there's this other question. So, from Victor Madlangbayan, what is the status of the National Land Use Act or bill now, and how important is it to resilience preparations for urban disasters?
Thank you, Dr. Vic Maglambayan. It is very important. The lower house or the House of Representatives have always passed their version of the National Land Use Act for the past many years. The hindrance would be at the Senate level. They have not passed their own version yet, and so it is a priority act, always mentioned by the president. This is very important for us. So while waiting for the National Land Use Act, we are formulating many things so that we can actually better prepare urban areas. By developing we are developing a national exposure database where we actually not only locate all houses and buildings and infrastructure on the surface here in the Philippines, but also populating these with various information. And DOST, through DOST PHIVOLCS, is leading the development of the National Exposure Database to help international land use planning. through the GeoRisk Philippines initiative, where we develop ICT platforms that can be easily used by the local government. We have the GeoMapper that through the use of mobile gadgets, we can map the features on the ground. Also the geoanalytics and the hazard hunter that are available for the public, and of course to the local government, where they can actually manipulate the hazards and risk information for better appreciation and also as guidance for decision making.
Thank you. Another question, do you think creating a disaster management department would help to facilitate the way we presently manage disasters?
Yes is the answer. The real problem with the current setup is that no one is really focused on the three major or the two major work for a disaster resilient country. We have to we need to have a disaster risk reduction effort to reduce the potential impact or risk before the hazard, and the other effort is the disaster management effort, disaster response and disaster recovery. These are lodged in many agencies, and so there is no continuous effort and managed by one authority. And whenever we talk about this, although agencies are doing their job, we need focus, and we need to make sure that people are also capacitated to do this. So it is important to have this. We need to separate those that are focused on epidemics and also other hazards, because they are two different things, but they can actually be integrated together because we are part of the government.
Marami pong tanong, Yusek Rene. So ito po yung isa. Alam po natin na maaaring biglang lumindol sa Metro Manila. In case na biglang maputol na agad ang komunikasyon, saan pwedeng pumunta agad ang mga tao para sa tulong? Ask ko lang po kung meron na bang na-identify na master zone sa 4 na areas na ina-identify as based on risk assessment.
Yes po, mayroon na pong na-identify, matagal na, but I think this must be really communicated to everyone. The first thing that one must do after a large earthquake event is to go to an open area nearby, which is safe. Meron po tayo mga mapping efforts ng open areas, at ang LGU dapat po ay alam din yan. Second, if one cannot go back to their own places, we have 4 major areas where we can congregate, and the local governments can actually designate more. Dito po sa Quezon City, parang ang command center ay dito sa Veterans Memorial Hospital. Sa south naman ay sa Villamor Air Base. Dito sa Western Zone, ang unang pinili nila ay sa Intramuros Golf Course, kaya lang may problema yan sa liquefaction kung sakaling malakas ang pag-inig, so they need to identify other areas. Further east maybe towards Santo Tomas area, University of Santo Tomas. And sa east naman, it's the Marikina Pasig area. Dito sa may Marikina area ang congregation zone, no? And these have been used as command centers where different LGUs need to report during earthquake drills for the past many years.
At this point, I would like to request our administrator to unmute Dr. Joel Cuello, former PAASE president. He wants to ask a question to Dr. Solidum.
Thank you, Giselle. Thank you, Undersecretary Solidum. The presentation you gave us really was a very helpful overview. One thing that I picked up on is that some of the recommendations that you gave, accounting for all of these potential disasters that could happen, particularly in Metro Manila, including the fault lines, really coincide with the recommendations for the development of the countryside in the Philippines, such as depopulating Metro Manila, distributing the businesses, and even relocating the center of the government to a more resilient area. So there's this agreement really between what's appropriate for disaster preparation, increasing the resilience of the country, both in terms of disaster, as well as developing the economy of the rest of the country. So my question is, it's important, of course, to implement these recommendations that you stated. Are you, as an official of DOST, a part of the National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council? And
Yes,
are you seriously addressing these recommendations?
yes, we are part. DOST is the Vice Chair Prevention Mitigation, but we are also part of an earthquake resilience core group among government that created actually this recommendation and approved by the President and his cabinet. And the whole cabinet agrees. In fact, we have already done many things interrupted by the COVID-19. For example, developing New Clark City as a potential government center. As you know, we hosted the Southeast Asian Games, and there are many buildings there that can be used and can be further utilized and improved to host an emergency area, or actually a more or less permanent area in case the government would need it. Personally, I'm part of groups that would look at existing regional government centers that were developed in the past many decades. And we are reviewing if their location is really appropriate. Regional centers for it to be a resilient center, because otherwise, if a regional government center is affected by a disaster, the whole governance in the area will also be affected. So we're trying to prepare different regions so that if in case the earthquake is not in Manila, but in Mindanao or Visayas, we can actually have flexibility in how to help these different centers. We are also looking into 21st century bureaucracy, because we are too concentrated in Metro Manila. We have to be dispersed, and we have to be agile in reality. And this is very telling during the COVID-19.
Okay. Well, one just quick follow-up, please. So somebody earlier asked a question whether there should be a Department of Disaster Management or something. But as you know now, there is that National Disaster Risk Reduction and Management Council. Is that existing council right now, in your opinion, sufficient to really address all of these serious issues and recommendations for them to be implemented? Or is there a need for, shall we say, a more solid entity like a department to really be able to address sufficiently and seriously all of these matters? What is your opinion on that?
I would sign on your second statement that there needs to be a department. We have to look at the current capability of the council and the people who are coordinating it. They needed to be beefed up. They needed to be, they need to have more people. They needed to have capacity building, not only in terms of the human resources, but also logistics. We cannot respond to large-scale disasters if we are just reliant on too many groups without having a core group. If we look at the Turkey government setup, the equivalent council there, they have their own helicopters, ambulances. We have sets of trained people, they have experts, and they coordinate. They coordinate also many agencies. But coordination can be very efficient if you really would be an expert on different fields. But I think with the department, the other agencies like DOST will not stop doing things. Science, technology, and innovation will be provided to the new department so that this will be the basis for their planning, preparedness to respond, and recovery decisions.
Thank you.
Thank you much.
Thank you, Dr. Solidum. I think it's good that you're emphasizing the need for expert training, okay? Training in science and technology. So do not worry, ladies and gentlemen, we will make the time for you to ask your questions and for Dr. Solidum to answer them. this is a very important subject at this time. Before I move on to the next question, because Dr. Coelho made this suggestion, I would like to follow it up with this question or suggestion. Dr. Solidum, have you considered that Clark City, you had mentioned it earlier, would be a place where some of the population in Metro Manila would be incentivized to move to, because I think Central Luzon is probably a safe area, although Mount Pinatubo erupted, but it probably won't erupt in the next 100 years or so. So would you consider that Clark City would be a place where government offices might be located? I understand it is really planned as a chartered city. So
Yes, yes.
are you planning it in such a way, DCDA is planning it to become resilient city? So
Yes.
maybe
Yeah.
tell us.
You know, the Vince Dizon, who's the head of that group, also the testing czar in COVID. Prior to this, I have personally visited the area. We have evaluated it, and I think the plan for that area is very good. In fact, early on, for several years ago, DBM has provided some financial support to really develop the New Clark area, because this is behind Pinatubo. It was not affected by the eruption. It will not be flooded. It's near Clark Air Base, the airport. And so logistically, that is one of the possible areas. But we also need to develop different areas in the Visayas or Mindanao. It's not only one, but we can start with it. It's not very easy to transfer everything to one area. But other agencies have been planning to move towards that side. In terms of population transfer, I've been working with many other businesses. And in fact, Pampanga Chamber of Commerce and Industry, they were all for making sure that first they prepare and make their area safe and resilient, and accommodate those that would want to invest in the area. This can be done in other provinces as well.
Thank you. So at this point, I just like to say that the PAASE is there to offer any kind of assistance to improve the science and technology competencies of our workers in these agencies. And we also support this development of Clark City as a science, technology, and innovation center. We call it an ecosystem. So we are preparing a proposal where we would like to contribute to regional development by help establishing these types of STI ecosystems. And Clark City, I think, is a very good candidate for one such STI ecosystem.
Yes,
So at this point, yes, I'd like to move to another question by Rene Reza. Thank you, Dr. Solidum, for a comprehensive overview. Our experience with Yolanda in Tacloban was that our first responders were also our first victims. Considering a West Valley Fault earthquake event, has government made plans for help to come from way beyond NCR and neighboring provinces?
Yeah, thank you, Rene Mayutokayo, for the question. The answer is yes. After we have formulated the plans for the Metro Manila Earthquake Impact Reduction Study, and actually the efforts have really took off by assigning which local governments need to be coming to Metro Manila. So, in fact, some of the cities have made arrangement for their sister cities or provinces. Although the provinces and regional units have been identified, including the armed forces, we have to admit that those that were selected are not ready and not familiar sometimes with the terrain and the exposure of many cities. So some cities have progressed but beyond identification by actually capacitating the LGU that would help them. For example, with Mayor Vico Soto, and when we had this training, we were also speakers there. they were coordinating with the Isabela and Cagayan provinces already. Kasi sila ang tutulong doon sa Eastern Zone. So magti-train din sila. Tapos pina-familiarize din nila yung mga taga doon about the Pasig area and neighboring cities. So ganoon na. But we need to equip them also. Ang sabi ko nga, the purpose is not to only help Metro Manila, but the earthquake might occur in the same area. So if we all do that, even those in Metro Manila need to be trained to help other regions. So one good thing with scenario development, not only trying to discuss the hazard, but the detailed impacts, would be to give everyone a sense of what can happen and what needs to be done down to the details.
Maraming salamat. Meron pa ba ibang mga tanong? So at this point, Dr. Solidum, I think we would like to know from you your own assessment from your perspective of the way we are handling COVID-19. So we are at this juncture where we will assess, or the government, the leadership will assess, decide whether we are going back to stricter quarantine. So from your perspective, what do you think the government should do for better implementation of physical distancing and quarantine and contact tracing, complement testing? Okay, so we'd like to hear it from you.
I think the ingredients are there. We started with a large area to be quarantined, but based on my experience with other disasters, if we know the hazard and the risk, we can actually very surgically pinpoint which areas need to be quarantined. And it's good that it's being done now by looking at barangay level. So ginagawa naman na. What needs to be done though is making sure that people follow, and we need the participation of everyone. Testing, and isolation and treatment. But I think this cannot be done unless everyone is cooperating. For example, in a volcanic eruption, kahit gaano kaganda yung assessment ng hazard, magbigay ka ng warning, kung yung pinapa-evacuate mo ay hindi susunod, maraming mamamatay. One good thing with Taal would be people evacuated. And so when the eruption happened, the base surge did not occur, but the heavy asphalt and the shaking caused collapses of many buildings, many houses. So if they were there, then we could have seen casualties. Mabuti na lang, masunurin din sila. And the local government really implemented things that we discussed prior to the activity. Ang kaibahan nga lang, dito sa COVID, siyempre nabigla, and then we try to improve as we operate.
Salamat. At this point, I'd like to read out the question of another former PAASE president, Ausa Rafica, and I was about to ask the same question about private sector involvement. What kind of private sector support to NRRDM do you think will be most helpful? And in particular, I also wanted to ask Dr. Solidum, during the time of the earthquakes and the other natural disasters, yung bang mga geological companies, yung mga companies ba natin engaged in energy or renewable in alternative energy, tumutulong ba sila sa gobyerno, sa mga LGUs?
Okay. The private sector is part of the National Disaster Risk Reduction Management Council. We have private sector representatives, we have civil society representatives, and we have representatives from the academia by law. And so they are part of it. And on the private side, there are many big groups that have organized themselves. First is to making sure that they do their own part in making businesses and their employees resilient. No? We coordinate with them very well. And also making sure that they, as a group, coordinate the help to government so that these help are made down to the community level. We have also a private public sector group called the National Resilience Council, where private sector organizations are involved, and the secretaries of the vice chair committees, prevention, mitigation, preparedness, response, and recovery are part of it. Now, when it comes to the energy sector and other sectors, we are asking each sector to develop resilience through their sector. For example, DOE, we have PHIVOLCS has trained the Department of Energy and the other companies that they are assisting on how to assess the potential of impact of earthquakes in the energy sector. And I myself have spoken in several power providers about their resilience. So we're doing that. So we're looking into risk assessment so that it will be more appropriate. No, for their assistance and their preparedness would be more appropriate. We're also doing this for DTI, no? Especially now with small, medium enterprises. Ginagawa na rin yan. But of course, the speed at which we want to do this is not as fast, especially now with COVID. But I think we can actually harmonize what is being done with COVID and the effort for other large-scale natural hazards.
Okay. So, siguro, one last question, and then we will move on. So, you said, Solidum, the other day, there was a report in the papers on these thousands of Filipinos who were gathered, concentrated in Rizal Memorial Stadium in Pasay. And it was a holding area for them to be, they were transients, and they would be then go to the provinces. And there was no physical distancing. So is there a problem with implementing the measures that the government has come up with? I know there are lots of materials, education materials, reminders and all, pero yung actual implementation on the ground, kailangan ba ng training yung ating implementors? Is there any way that PAASE and academe can help? Kasi we are here to help you.
Actually, I just read in the newspaper what happened in the Rizal Stadium and the reason why there were very high number of people. There were people who were scheduled to go and they knew, but then yung mga information were shared to other people who wanted to go home and take advantage of the libreng hatid. And so they were not scheduled and they went to the area. And so dumaming tao. And then nagkaroon ng mga pag-ulan. So there was a choice between letting them just out there or having them inside the Coliseum where they will be protected from nature. So yun yung nangyari. Now, I think the real issue is not only in the implementation, but how people will participate. Parang ano lang yan, ma'am, building code. People say that the government must implement the building code. But we as house owners need to understand that we will die because we live in a place where we decided that we will use substandard materials, poorly designed building, and the construction was not very sturdy. And so when it comes to this kind of implementation, we have to emphasize the biggest role will be on us, on following everything that government and other scientists are saying. Otherwise, implement ka lang implement, kapag hindi sumunod yung tao, that's a problem. So we have to intervene on making people understand. Sa building implementation, for example, ano yung intervention ng PHIVOLCS? Hindi kami nagsasabing dapat implement lang ng local government. We will educate people on to appreciate what is a resilient house for earthquake. We give them design that they can use. We explain. Actually, in reality, when it comes to that, we wanted the curriculum in schools to be adjusted so that we teach students at high school level the basic design or basic need for a house that would be resilient to earthquake or strong typhoon. Hindi yan tinuturo. Tinuturo lang yan sa civil engineers. So pag hindi ka civil engineer, kahit medical doctor ka, hindi ka nagbasa, hindi mo alam yung minimum requirements ng matibay na bahay. So education is very important.
Tama po yan. So is the DOST now coordinating with the Department of Education to include such materials in early education, in basic education.
We have been working with them on this.
Long term.
Of course, there are various speeds at which these things happen. I'm very glad to say that during the time of Luistro, I suggested to them that since we are giving students a lot of assignments that sometimes are not practical, I told them, why not give students an earthquake assignment where we prepare sets of questions, iba-ibang question, depende sa age group ng bata, and the assignment will be answered by both the student and the parent. The product will be an earthquake preparedness plan for the house to be submitted to the advisor. So ginawa nila yan. So pwedeng gawin yan. So we also intervene in some of the things that they do. We have been training teachers in various divisions for various hazards. So ganun ang gagawin.
Maraming salamat. Nagtagal itong ating Q&A kasi napaka-importante nitong ating diskusyon at this time. And I just like to end by saying that within the PAASE, we have Christopher and Marivic Bernido, Ramon Magsaysay awardees.
Yes.
Okay? They have this successful learning method, dynamic learning system, where you have a very suitable ways to get this online or for remote learning. Maari namang doon din mag-umpisa kasi mabilis po silang kumilos. Baka magkaroon ng dynamic learning materials for disasters and resilience.
Yeah, PAASE can actually help in many ways.
Yes, sige po. So we will try to push that, no? So at this point, Yusek Solidum, maraming salamat for agreeing to speak to us today and engage us in these important discussions. And it was on relatively short notice. And yet, because of your sense of duty and public service to the country, you accepted. Immediately, you told me, yes, I'm willing to do it. So maraming salamat. And I know you're very busy. So everyone, let's give Dr. Solidum a rousing round of applause, virtual applause.
Thank you very much.
So at this point, I would like to turn the floor to my co-host, Dr. Alisa Alampay, so we can move on to the rest of our program. Dr. Alampay.